After we announced my pregnancy, my sister-in-law's plan to humiliate me at my husband's promotion party backfired, landing her in jail and in a divorce. For the past 7 years, I, 29, have been married to Nate, and our life together has been wonderful, except for his relationship with his sister Victoria, or Vicky, as everyone calls her, who seems to bring nothing but negativity into our lives. Don't get me wrong. I genuinely tried to love Vicky when I first met her. Working in marketing at a tech startup, I understand the importance of first impressions and building relationships. But over time, my perspective shifted dramatically as I witnessed her manipulative and toxic behavior. I've spent years trying to stay on Vicky's good side, despite her running a struggling high-end boutique and constantly posting carefully curated photos on her Instagram that show a perfect life that doesn't quite match reality. The tension between us traces back to Nate's dating history. When he was 17, he dated Vicky's best friend, a relationship that ended because he felt pressured by Vicky to maintain it. Then at 23, when Nate was single again, Vicky tried to set him up with another friend of hers. When he refused, she went crying to their parents, Robert and Catherine, about how she wanted him to marry someone she was comfortable with. Thankfully, they didn't give much weight to her dramatics. Throughout the early stages of Nate's and my relationship, his parents were incredibly supportive, but Vicky maintained this cold, almost hostile attitude toward me. She would bring up Nate's exes out of nowhere whenever I was around, updating him on their successes and suggesting ways to reconnect with them. "Oh, did you see Sarah's promotion at Google?" she would say, or "Emma just bought a house in that neighborhood you always loved." Even Nate found it strange and would ask her to stop. It wasn't just me noticing this behavior. Vicky would then get furious and mock me, claiming I was jealous and that Nate shouldn't be with someone like me. A subtle dig at my public university education compared to her incomplete degree from an expensive private art school. She would accidentally invite one of Nate's exes to family dinners, claiming she had just bumped into them that day and had to invite them. Social media drama. Though she doesn't follow me, Vicky obsessively checks my Instagram account. As a marketing manager, I maintain a public profile for professional networking, and I've noticed she's always among the first to view my stories. If any male colleague comments on my posts about our startup's achievements or marketing campaigns, she immediately runs to Nate, complaining about how I'm posting inappropriate content. It would be almost comical if it weren't so exhausting. Nate and I often find ourselves laughing at her wild interpretations of my completely professional posts. When Nate and I decided to move in together, Vicky launched a full campaign to break us up. She told him I was deeply flawed as a woman and that she could find someone more suitable, probably meaning someone from her boutique's social circle. As someone who worked her way up from internships in Silicon Valley to my current position, hearing her dismiss my character based on her superficial standards was particularly wounding. Engagement drama. The situation deteriorated further after Nate proposed. During our engagement announcement at his parents' home in the Seattle suburbs, while everyone else was celebrating, I noticed Vicky sitting quietly, her perfectly manicured hands clenched tight around her phone. Suddenly, she sprang up from her chair and stormed out, her designer heels clicking against the hardwood floors. Later that evening, she called Nate in tears, screaming about how she deserved to be the first to know about the engagement, not finding out with everyone else since she was the most important woman in his life. What really unsettled me was the message she sent afterward. It was almost threatening in tone, advising me about how I should treat her brother, emphasizing that she had always been the only woman in his life. The message left me feeling cold. There was something distinctly unsettling about her possessiveness. I left her message on read, which I knew would irritate her even more, but I couldn't bring myself to engage with such bizarre behavior. Wedding planning drama. Every time Vicky saw me after that, she would pointedly ignore me while still involving herself in all the wedding preparations. She showed up uninvited to everything: dress shopping, the bridal shower, even my private meetings with the wedding planner. Both Catherine, my future mother-in-law, and Nate called her out multiple times, but her criticism of our wedding choices reached new heights. She'd openly express her disapproval of everything, from the venue to the flowers, always with a pointed reference to how someone of better breeding would do things differently. The breaking point came during a discussion about centerpieces with Catherine at their family home. I was explaining my vision for elegant but understated arrangements when Vicky, who had been scrolling through her boutique's struggling Instagram account, suddenly interjected. "This just proves why Nate should have married someone with actual taste," she sneered, adjusting her obviously designer outfit. "Someone who understands class." That was it. The moment I lost my patience. Standing up, my hands shaking slightly, I told her firmly that she was no longer welcome at our wedding. I couldn't take her constant belittling and criticism anymore. The look on Vicky's face was almost comical, pure shock, as if no one had ever stood up to her before. She gaped at me, then at Catherine, clearly expecting her mother to take her side. But Catherine, who had witnessed years of this behavior, simply nodded in agreement with my decision. Vicky's perfectly composed facade cracked completely. Manipulation attempts. Later that evening, she called Nate crying, demanding that he control his future wife. Her voice, which she usually kept carefully modulated for her social media videos, was shrill and uncontrolled. Nate, however, stood firm. Either she would genuinely apologize, or she wouldn't be attending the wedding. This prompted a grudging text apology from her, which I again left unread. I was already exhausted from wedding preparations and had zero interest in engaging with her manufactured drama. Wedding day. She did end up attending our wedding, as I wanted to avoid giving her ammunition for future criticism. While all our guests embraced the elegant blush and cream color scheme we'd chosen, Vicky arrived looking like she was attending a funeral, in a floor-length black gown with a dramatic veil. In the well-lit ballroom of our venue, she stood out like an intentional dark cloud among the soft, celebratory colors. To say we were stunned would be an understatement. Throughout the reception, Vicky made a point of visiting every table, dramatically lamenting about losing her brother to another woman. When Nate confronted her about her inappropriate attire, she turned on the waterworks, claiming she had the right to wear whatever she chose, and that I was being controlling, playing the victim while deliberately causing a scene. It was textbook Vicky behavior. Finally, Robert and Catherine had to ask her to leave, which was mortifying but necessary. New family dynamics. After that day, I maintained strict boundaries with Vicky. When I gave birth to our son Nate Jr., I made it clear she wasn't welcome around our baby. She tried to protest, flooding my phone with messages about family rights, but Nate's parents fully supported my decision. They understood exactly why I wanted to keep Vicky away from our child. 2 years ago, Vicky suffered a miscarriage with her then-boyfriend Marcus. It completely devastated her, and her usually perfectly curated Instagram went dark for weeks. It was truly a difficult time for everyone. Given our own status as parents, Nate and I felt compassion for her loss, despite our history. We decided to be more lenient and allowed her to have supervised visits with Nate Jr., hoping that perhaps the tragedy had given her a new perspective. Temporary peace. Surprisingly, she was genuinely lovely with our son. For a while, it seemed like she had changed. Her Instagram posts became less about designer clothes and more about authentic family moments. But gradually, the old Vicky began to resurface. Her boutique was struggling, but instead of adapting her business model, she spent hours complaining about how hard her life was, how nothing ever worked out for her, always blaming ex-friends or employees for her business troubles. I noticed a pattern. In her worldview, she was never wrong. She'd masterfully play the victim in every confrontation. her carefully crafted social media presence always telling a different story than reality. Wedding drama round 2. This year, Vicky decided to marry Marcus and send out invitations to everyone except us. Given that our relationship had seemed to improve, Nate was surprised by our exclusion. When we asked about it, she launched into an elaborate explanation about how she couldn't invite me because I might cause a scene at her wedding, rich coming from someone who had worn black to my wedding. When I called to understand her reasoning, she brazenly admitted to wearing black to our wedding and said she was worried I'd do the same to hers. The manipulation was so obvious, it was almost laughable. "I can't believe you're still holding that against me," she said, her voice taking on that familiar wounded tone she used in her Instagram stories. "It was ages ago. You should be over it by now." Frustrated by her tactics, Nate discussed the situation with his parents. Together, they decided to inform Vicky that they wouldn't be attending her wedding or contributing financially to it, which I later learned had been her main concern all along. This sent her into a spiral of tears and accusations, with me naturally being blamed for starting this disaster. Even Marcus, who usually stayed out of family drama, pointed out that she was being unreasonable, especially since she had just admitted to deliberately sabotaging our wedding. Fake reconciliation. Later, Vicky reached out with an apology that felt as curated as her social media posts. She was clearly more concerned about her parents not funding her wedding than actual reconciliation. Though I was skeptical, I decided to take the high road for family peace. Her wedding to Marcus went ahead as planned, and we all attended, maintaining a polite facade. Marriage troubles. Not even 6 months later, Vicky showed up at our door in Seattle's rainy twilight, complaining about her failing marriage. While Marcus was working long hours at his tech job, she'd been struggling to keep her boutique afloat. Nate and I let her stay with us for a few days, during which she spent countless hours venting about Marcus. They were having fertility issues, and true to form, Vicky placed all the blame on him. Growing suspicions. When she wasn't complaining about Marcus, Vicky became oddly fixated on my routine. As a marketing manager, I often head to the gym before work, sometimes bringing my office clothes to change into after my workout. I noticed Vicky watching me with unusual intensity, asking strange questions about why I showered at the gym or why I even needed to work out. I explained simply that I enjoyed maintaining my fitness and preferred not arriving at client meetings sweaty, but she would just nod with an unsettling expression. Her behavior reminded me of how she used to monitor my social media, but now it felt more immediate and invasive. The lunch incident. During lunch at her parents' house, Catherine mentioned a friend who was divorcing after discovering her husband's infidelity. Before anyone could properly react, Vicky interrupted to ask Nate if we had a prenup. The dining room fell silent, the clinking of silverware suddenly stopping. She stared at Nate expectantly, as if I wasn't even present at the table. Nate, his voice steady but firm, explained that we both had successful careers and had never felt the need for a prenup. Accusations. Vicky let out an exaggerated snort, her boutique owner facade slipping as she launched into a tirade about how cheaters are everywhere these days and how Nate could be blindsided any day. When I demanded she explain herself, she turned to face me directly for the first time, her perfectly made-up face twisted with malice. "Well, isn't it obvious?" she said, her voice dripping with fake concern. "You're always carrying around a change of clothes, disappearing to the gym. As Nate's sister, it's my duty to warn him." Her words hung in the air like poison. Robert and Catherine jumped in immediately, telling her she was out of line and needed to stop interfering in others' marriages. But Vicky, caught up in her performance, couldn't stop herself. With a cruel smile, she suggested that maybe Nate Jr. wasn't even Nate's son, since he doesn't look exactly like him. I watched the color drain from my husband's face before being replaced by a deep red of fury I'd never seen before. Looking directly at his sister, Nate's voice was ice cold as he said, "You're not a mother because you don't deserve to be one. Your child would be better off in heaven than with someone like you." The words seemed to physically hit Vicky, her carefully maintained composure cracking completely. Family confrontation. While Catherine and Robert sat in stunned silence, Nate continued, his voice rising with years of pent-up frustration. He called her out for being a shameless person who tried to ruin everything because her own life was falling apart. "You're just a failure," he said, "sitting in your dying boutique all day while Marcus works himself to death trying to keep you afloat. Instead of fixing your own marriage, you're here making up lies about prenups and questioning my son's paternity." The aftermath. Vicky burst into tears, clearly expecting sympathy, but even Marcus remained silent beside her. This wasn't one of her curated Instagram meltdowns. This was real, raw, and uncomfortable. She eventually ran to the bathroom, leaving a heavy silence in her wake. Nate was still trembling with anger. I'd never seen my tech-savvy, usually calm husband lose control like this. I gently squeezed his hand, while Catherine tried to calm him down, all of us understanding how Vicky's toxicity had finally pushed him over the edge. He apologized to me about Vicky's horrible insinuations about our son, but I just nodded, feeling oddly relieved that he had finally stood up to her so publicly. He also apologized to Marcus, but pointedly ignored Vicky even after he'd cooled down. Cutting ties. After that lunch, we completely cut contact with Vicky. Her actions were affecting not just me anymore, but were clearly damaging Nate as well. We blocked her on everything: phone, social media, email. Catherine and Robert spoke with us afterward and agreed that Vicky had finally gone too far. They'd never seen their usually composed son explode like that, and it was clear that Vicky's constant pushing had finally broken something fundamental in their family dynamic. The pregnancy news. 2 months later, I discovered I was pregnant. It was unexpected but wonderful news. Nate and I felt blessed to be welcoming another family member. We decided to announce it at Nate's promotion party, which his parents were hosting in their beautifully landscaped backyard. We thought it would be the perfect way to honor Nate's career achievement while sharing our joy with close friends and family. The party was going smoothly until Vicky showed up uninvited, having heard about it through family connections. Nate and I nearly stumbled when we saw her. She immediately rushed to hug Nate, apologizing profusely for their last interaction. Nate, keeping his composure, firmly told her that if she was really sorry, she needed to apologize to me first, since she had attacked my character. False apologies. Vicky turned to me with a practiced smile, the same one she used in her boutique's social media posts. She claimed she'd been in therapy for the past few months and had realized how inappropriate her behavior had been. Though I didn't believe a word, I nodded politely for the sake of Nate's celebration. Catherine and Robert checked on us discreetly, offering to remove her since they hadn't known she would come, but Nate wanted to avoid creating a scene at his promotion party. The party. Something felt off about Vicky's behavior throughout the celebration. She was laughing and socializing with an almost manic energy, completely unlike her usual carefully curated demeanor. She kept mentioning her therapy sessions, but her overly cheerful attitude felt forced and unsettling. When Nate gave a heartfelt speech about being the luckiest man alive, expressing his gratitude for another year with me, I felt myself blushing with genuine happiness, remembering why we fell in love years ago. The announcement. Finally, Nate and I decided to share our news. With growing smiles, we announced the pregnancy, and the backyard erupted in joy. My mother rushed to embrace me, tears in her eyes, while Robert congratulated Nate and me with tears streaming down his face. Everyone was excited, asking about baby names, and showing genuine happiness for us. Everyone except Vicky. She stood frozen, her perfect makeup unable to hide her shock. Her expression shifted from surprise to irritation, and she turned away from the celebration. The poisoning attempt. I tried to tell myself she was just processing the news, though I worried she might try to ruin another family gathering. While chatting with guests, I started to help Catherine and Robert with serving lunch, but they insisted I rest, treating me like precious cargo already. As I sat waiting for Nate to bring me a plate, Vicky approached with an unnaturally bright smile, insisting on serving me herself since she was so excited about the pregnancy. The incident. She handed me a plate, adding sweetly how she wanted to make amends for her past behavior. I nodded politely, maintaining the peace. As she walked away, I was about to start eating when I fortunately noticed she had put shrimp on my plate. Having a severe shellfish allergy, something well documented on my medical ID bracelet and known to the whole family, I was surprised by her mistake. Disappointed but not wanting to cause a scene, I stood up to get my own food. That's when Marcus approached to congratulate me on the pregnancy. After some small talk, he noticed my untouched plate and asked why I wasn't eating. I explained about the shrimp, assuming it was just another of Vicky's thoughtless actions. Marcus assured me he'd take the plate since he loved shrimp, allowing me to get fresh food for myself. The crisis. Within 5 minutes of Marcus taking a bite, he started violently vomiting and gasping. The backyard celebration turned to chaos as everyone watched him struggle to stand. Nate and Vicky rushed to his side, but Marcus could only gesture at his throat and the plate. Our eyes widened in horror as we realized something was terribly wrong with the food. Moments later, Marcus collapsed, sending the party into panic. Someone called an ambulance while Vicky started sobbing uncontrollably, shooting accusatory glares in my direction when she learned I had given Marcus my plate. The hospital. Later at the hospital, we received the shocking news. Marcus had been poisoned. I nearly fainted when I realized that plate had been meant for me and my unborn child. Neither Nate, Catherine, Robert, nor my parents knew yet that the poisoned food had originally been my serving. The police were collecting evidence, and Marcus remained in the hospital recovering. Vicky stayed overnight with him, though I noticed the hospital staff watching her carefully after the initial toxicology reports came back. The aftermath. Nate and I found ourselves fielding endless calls from relatives wanting to know what happened to Marcus and who could have poisoned him. The incident completely shook Catherine and Robert. They were so disturbed they stayed at our house, too afraid to return to their own home where the incident had occurred. I felt sick knowing how quickly everything had unraveled during what should have been a joyous celebration. The thought of having to tell everyone that the poisoned plate was originally mine, personally handed to me by Vicky, filled me with dread. If this became an official investigation, I would have to tell the police everything. The security cameras in Catherine and Robert's backyard had captured it all. Vicky's calculated approach, her insistence on serving me, everything. Living in fear. The weight of what Vicky had tried to do pressed heavily on my mind. The boutique owner, who had spent years carefully crafting her social media image, had just attempted to poison her pregnant sister-in-law. I couldn't stop thinking about what might have happened if I hadn't noticed the shrimp. I couldn't bear the thought of being anywhere near her, and the idea of her being around my children terrified me. She had shown she had no limits when it came to causing harm. First update. My hands were shaking as I documented everything that had happened. Sleep became impossible. Nate stayed close, hovering protectively, though he didn't yet know the full truth about his sister's actions. He assumed I was just worried about the general situation, while I carried the horrible knowledge of what his sister had actually attempted to do. Every time I thought about Marcus accidentally consuming the poison meant for me and my unborn baby, I broke down crying. The security cameras around Catherine and Robert's house had captured everything from the backyard party. I knew we could verify through the footage that Vicky had personally delivered that plate to me. I decided I needed to tell everyone the truth that evening. The revelation. We gathered for dinner that evening, and I felt incredibly grateful to have such supportive in-laws. With Catherine and Robert already staying with us, I knew this was the moment to share what I knew. Taking a deep breath, the weight of the situation heavy on my shoulders, I asked everyone to listen. The marketing professional in me wanted to structure this revelation carefully, but my hands were shaking as I began to speak. I explained how Vicky had specifically brought me the poison plate, how it contained shrimp despite my known allergy, and how Marcus had unknowingly consumed it instead. As I spoke, I watched their expressions change from confusion to horror. Nate's face transformed from uncertainty to pure rage as he processed what his sister had attempted to do to his pregnant wife. Catherine, ever practical even in crisis, immediately suggested reviewing the security footage. Robert agreed grimly, his usual calm demeanor shaken. As they pulled up the camera app on their phones, the truth became undeniable. The footage clearly showed Vicky delivering the plate to me, followed by the sequence of events leading to Marcus's collapse. The decision. The weight of this evidence left no room for doubt. Nate struggled to contain his fury as he watched his sister's calculated actions on video. Catherine and Robert looked devastated, seeing their daughter's deliberate attempt to harm their pregnant daughter-in-law. We sat in stunned silence, trying to process why Vicky would go to such extremes. Given the severity of the situation, my in-laws decided to forward the footage to the police. They knew that Marcus would need to be the one to press charges against Vicky once he recovered. So Nate and Robert planned to visit him in the hospital to share what we'd discovered. The guilt. Every time I thought about how I'd handed that plate to Marcus, my stomach churned with guilt. The successful marketing manager in me, usually so confident in handling crises, felt completely helpless. I couldn't eat or sleep, constantly worried about his condition and anxious about how he would react to learning the truth. 1 month later, I'm back with an update, though being pregnant during all this drama has been overwhelming. First, the big news. Vicky was arrested. After seeing the security footage, my in-laws handed it to the police. When confronted with the evidence, Vicky broke down immediately and confessed to everything. Marcus, still recovering in the hospital, was as shocked as any of us when Nate approached him with the truth. Nate told his brother-in-law, "You'll always be family to us, regardless of what you decide to do." He encouraged Marcus to press charges, explaining that this level of calculated malice couldn't go unpunished. Marcus not only agreed to press charges, but also filed for divorce. The truth emerges. Vicky called Catherine and Robert in tears, begging for help. Then came another twist. She revealed she was pregnant herself. She tried to manipulate them by pleading for mercy for the sake of their grandchild, but Robert finally put his foot down. "You need to learn to take responsibility for your actions," he told her firmly. "We're done enabling your behavior." While Catherine struggled with her daughter's situation, she understood they couldn't excuse such actions anymore. The police investigation revealed clear evidence of Vicky tampering with food intended to harm me, which backfired and injured Marcus instead. She's been charged with multiple counts, including attempted harm to both me and my unborn child. Even as she faced these charges, she continued to blame me, claiming this was somehow all my fault. She begged Marcus not to press charges, but his mind was made up. Family healing. Nate Jr. remains unaware of what his aunt did. After careful discussion, Nate and I decided we'll eventually have an age-appropriate conversation with him about these events. It won't be an easy talk, but it's necessary. Following my doctor's advice, I'm getting ultrasounds every 2 weeks to monitor the pregnancy. We've decided to keep the baby's gender a surprise, one spot of joy amid all this chaos. My parents have become extremely protective, urging me to seek therapy. They're right. I've developed an intense fear about food. I haven't prepared myself. a direct result of Vicky's actions. Nate has been incredibly supportive, understanding my anxiety and helping me work through it step by step. 8 months later, Vicky is now in prison. She was found guilty on all charges. While I never attended her court hearings, Catherine and Robert would occasionally share updates. In court, Vicky finally admitted to years of jealousy toward me. She confessed that she had always dreamed of one of her boutique's socialite friends marrying Nate, and when he chose me, a mere marketing manager, she began her campaign of harassment. She revealed that at Nate's promotion party, she became enraged when we announced our pregnancy because she had planned to announce her own pregnancy that day. Having suffered a previous miscarriage, she saw this as her moment to finally shine, but felt we had stolen her spotlight. In her fury, amplified by pregnancy hormones, she mixed rat poison into my dinner. She claimed she only wanted to make me sick enough for hospitalization, not to cause serious harm to me or the baby. The verdict. In a shocking display of denial, she argued for a reduced sentence, claiming she never expected me to give Marcus the plate, and that technically, I was the one who poisoned her husband. The judge, naturally, dismissed these arguments. She's now serving her sentence, effectively removed from our lives for a considerable time. Marcus has finally freed himself through divorce, and we make sure to include him in family events whenever possible. Healing and moving forward. During a heart-to-heart conversation, I apologized profusely to Marcus for giving him the poisoned plate. The guilt had been eating at me for months. He stopped me mid-apology, firmly stating that none of this was my fault. Seeing him recover and move forward with his life has been a relief. As for Nate and me, we've welcomed a baby daughter into our family. Despite the shadows of the past, her presence has brought new light and warmth to our lives. Nate Jr. has embraced his role as a big brother, showing incredible tenderness toward his little sister. Watching our children bond brings us joy we never thought possible after such dark times. Both our parents and in-laws have been pillars of support, helping us navigate this new chapter of our lives.